Hello everyone, welcome to Software Testing Help. I'm Sharmila and in this video we will see how to create your keyword driven framework. So this session is a continuation of our previous video wherein we discussed about various components of keyword driven framework on a high level, and we also understood how the architecture and the flow of keyword driven framework works. So now in this session we will see some more implementation of this framework. So we'll start with creating a project, maintaining a library file, how to include keywords and assertions in the library file, and also how to script your main driver script. So now let's get started. So any framework you create, you start with creating a project. So I have my project created and I have two packages inside it. So one package I will have it for my main driver script wherein I'll have my scripting here, main driver scripting, and in another package I'll maintain my library file. So in this package of library file, you can see that I have two Java class file. One is for assertions, another one is for keywords. So in my architecture, framework architecture, I have just segregated my assertions in a separate library file and keywords in a separate library file. So it is according to your convenience. You can add these both in a single library file, that is in a single Java class file, and also maintain it across. But to have it in a simpler and more easier way to maintain my framework, I'm just splitting it across the actions separately and the assertions separately. So when I say keywords, that is the actions that we perform on the web element, and when I say assertions, that is the verification process that we do after each test case. So these verification keywords I will add it under this Java class file, and all the actions that I do I add it under keywords Java class file. Okay, so now my project structure is ready. I have all my Selenium jar files, dependency jar files included. I have my main driver script just created, but I'm not implemented it. I have my library file ready, so now I can start writing my keywords. Now before having a look at the keywords, let's see how a template looks like. So whenever you create keywords, whatever keyword you create, keywords in other words are nothing but the user defined methods that you create here. You fill in this Excel sheet and then add the description accordingly. Similarly for the assertions also. And then I'm designing my template like this, wherein I'm segregating each of this sheet to a test case. So each of my test sheet corresponds to one test case. Okay, so I have two test cases in my application for now. That is, one is to verify title, another one is to verify success login. So I have segregated those two in two separate sheets. And when you look into each test case sheet, you can see various parameters inside. So now let's have a look at the parameters. So first one is the test steps. So this is nothing but the keywords. So as and when you perform your actions, you write your keywords accordingly. So here I have my keywords empty. So if I have my keywords already filled in, I'll just look for the particular keyword for that test step and I'll fill in accordingly. And each keyword that is my test step might require a certain set of parameters. It depends upon the action that we do. So we will see how to fill in these parameter details later. So now just have an idea of how a framework template looks like. So this is where the user actually interacts and fills in the details. So my framework I've designed in such a way that all the data I'm keeping it in the Excel sheet. I'm externalizing all the data. I am not uh, like hard coding anything in my main driver script. So everything I'm going to get it from the user. So not all keyword driven framework looks the same. So in some cases you might see only the test steps getting externalized in the Excel sheet. Rather these will be present in your main driver script, and in some cases you may see the object repository, test data and test steps in your Excel sheet, and then the assertion will be carried out in the main driver script. So according to each application's convenience, each framework requirement, the template is designed. So my design is in such a way that I try the maximum to externalize everything, and that is how I've designed it, so that it becomes easier for the user to use this framework, wherein his only point of interaction will be this Excel sheet. Okay, so not all keyword driven framework will have the same template. So it again changes depending upon that project's framework that is getting designed. Okay, so now let's have a look at the project's object repository. So when I say object repository, it is nothing but the collection of objects with which Selenium finds the corresponding web element on the web page. Okay, so this object repository, you can maintain it either as a properties file or an Excel file or a text file depending on your convenience again. So I am going by the properties file. So what I'll do is first I'll create a properties file, and here I will put my object. So in what fashion will I assign my value of the object and its locator? So I will put it in such a way that object name equal to object value. So when I say object name, this is the user defined name that I give. Okay, and the object value is nothing but the value of the locator. So for example, if you're identifying by XPath, then the XPath value. If you're identifying by ID, then it would be the ID value. If you're identifying by class name, then it would be the class name value. So whatever value you're using for that identification technique, that locator's value is what you give it here. So you say object name equal to object value. And now I'll show you how to create properties file. So just open your notepad. Now, for example, I'm going to capture this text box of username. So in that case, I'll just write username in the notepad. So I'll open my notepad again. So this is my object name equal to object value, and I'm going to take it by XPath. So this is the XPath of that particular element. So when I give find, it highlights that element. Okay. So I say object name equal to object value. That's it. Similarly for password, if I go for class name, I can specify the class name value. So if I go for class name for password, this is the class name for my password, and in my notepad I'll fill in accordingly like this. And eventually I'll capture all my web elements likewise, and I will save this particular object repository. So when saving it, you should give file save as, and give a name for your object repository, and then give the extension as dot properties, and change this dot text to all files. And then when you save it, it gets saved as a properties file like this. Okay, so now I have done creating my properties file. Let's start creating our keywords. Always before creating keywords, you should have a look at your test cases and then come to a conclusion on what actions your entire application works around. But my assumption is that always every application will have this set of keywords like entering the URL, performing a click function, type function, wait function. So these keywords, I consider it as universal because every application will definitely have these commands or actions to be performed in their test cases. So straight away, I'll start creating user defined methods for these actions, and I will include it in my keywords class now. So let's start with entering the URL. So I create an object from my driver, and then I'm creating a method called enter URL. So then I say driver.get, which is the function that helps me to do this action. And here I'll pass the URL. So this URL, I'm going to get it from the user. So whenever user calls this method, he'll just pass the URL as a parameter. So I will pass it as a parameter, and that in turn I will assign it over here. So here you can see that I have passed two parameters. One is the driver and another one is the test data. The driver I haven't initiated here. The reason being I will get the driver instance from the user. So whenever user calls this particular method, he will pass the driver instance, which in turn will get assigned to the driver object over here. Okay, similarly he will pass the test data and that gets assigned over here. So now my first simple entering the URL method is ready. Next, let me start with the click action. Okay, so I'm going to create a method called click, and here I'll pass my driver.find element. So by XPath, by ID, whatever locator type, followed by the locator value. So this part we will see later how to generalize it. And then I add my action called click. And the driver's instance, as we saw in the previous method, I'm passing the instance of the driver as a parameter, which in turn gets assigned to the driver object here. Okay, so now I've designed my click action, but this part is not generalized. So this part I need to generalize in such a way that for any element that I call this action, that particular element should be identified and the action should be performed. So for that, how am I going to do is, let me first take a look at my template. So when I have a look at the template, I can see that I don't have any web element reference directly. Rather, I have object name and locator type. I have two parameters, object name and locator type, with which I can frame my web element. Okay. So now how am I going to frame it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate method to frame this expression. So in this method, I will pass the object name and locator type. Okay, so the locator type the user gives XPath or ID. So directly I will take that and I will fill it in here, XPath or ID or class name. So by.xpath, by.id, by.class name. But what about this part? Here I don't have a direct locator value. I only have the object name here. So in that case, I will read this object name and then go to the object repository and find its corresponding value, and this value in turn I will fill it in here. So that is how I will do in this method implementation. So by dot the locator type directly I'm getting it from the user, well and fine. What about this locator value? I should get the object name, go to the repository, find the value of the object name and fill it here. So this object repository plays a vital role in recognizing the value of the locator using this object name. Okay, so now let's see how we'll do this. Okay, now I have everything open simultaneously so that it will be easier for us to relate and understand. So now, as I told, I am going to frame this part using a method. So I'm going to create a method now. So I just say get object, and that I'm going to create using two parameters, right? So I will read this object name and locator type, and using that I'm going to create this method. So I will pass those two parameters over here. I have passed those two parameters. So this part wherein the by part I can fill in directly using the locator type, right? Only for the object name, that is the locator type value, I should go to the object repository and in turn get the value and fill. So this by part, let me do it. Let me read the object locator type and then form the expression by followed by the locator type. So let us form the expression by followed by the locator type now. So here using if else clause, I am reading the locator type and forming the expression by XPath, by class name, by ID, by name, by CSS selector, by link text and so on. Okay, so now this part is done. I have framed my by followed by the locator type. Next I should fill the value of my locator type. So for that I should read the object repository. So to read this object repository, I have a file input stream class that helps me to open the file and read the contents. So let me call that class now. So here you can see that I am opening my object repository from this path. So this path corresponds to the current project workspace. From there I'm going to the folder called externals, and from there I'm going to dot properties. So this is my project workspace, and then I have my externals folder and I have my object repository. So now I've mentioned my path, and then using that particular path I'm trying to open the file using this file input stream. So now my file is opened. Next I need to access the contents inside my file. So now my file is a properties file. So I have a class called properties which helps me to open or access the contents inside my file. So what I say is I just create an object for my properties, and then once that object is created I can call my property like that. When I say prop.getProperty of username, it will refer to the username from the object repository. So this is my object name, it will get the object value. So this will return the object's value. So how can I make this in a more generalized way? So instead of having username, I can have it as object name, right? So for whatever object name I pass, whatever object name, be it a username, password, login button, whatever object name I pass, that corresponding property name is read. Prop.getProperty of object name reads the property name and returns that corresponding value. So now I got the locator type value. So I should use this value inside my expression. So here I need to use it. Let us understand it once again. So this part we have framed by locator type. So this is what is pending. So for that, I am reading the properties file. So I open the properties file using file input stream, and to read it, I have a class called properties, and I say get property followed by the object name returns the value of that particular property. Okay, so this I will pass it over here. This prop.get property, I will pass it over here, which is nothing but the value inside my object. So my method is ready now. So what does my method do? It gets the object name and locator type as the parameters, and using the locator type directly it splits itself into by class, by XPath, and so on using if else clause statements. And to fill in this part, that is the locator type value, it opens the object repository using file input stream, which in turn reads the contents using the properties class file. And when I say property, that is object name dot get property followed by that particular object name, that corresponding object's value is returned, and that gets filled in here. Okay, so this is done. So now I can use this in my main method. So the return type here is not void, rather I am returning a by class. I am returning this by expression. This is what I am returning in my method. So my return type will be by. So instead of having this, I have generalized it in my method. So I will just give a call to the method. So I'll say this dot get object. This corresponds to the current instance. And here I'll pass the object name and locator type. So this in turn is getting called from another method. So again, I should pass the object name and locator type as parameters over here. So now I have generalized my way of identifying the web element just by using the object name, locator type, and the object repository. Okay, so in this way you can identify your web elements and perform whole lots of actions like click action, type action, mouse hover, whatever action you want to perform, you can perform on any element. Just make a call to this method, pass the object name, locator type, and that web element will be recognized. As simple as that. Now let's have a look at the assertions. So when I say assertions, we have categories inside assertions. For example, for assert text, you can assert for either contains, equals, starts with, ends with. Similarly, for asserting an element, you can assert for either getting displayed, either it is enabled, disabled, or it is selected, deselected, and so on. So what I'll do is I will create separate user-defined function for each assertion and categorize assertion types under it. So I will show you how I'll do it. So let me take this assert element. So I will include a user defined method for assert element and also categorize these displayed, enabled, selected, etc. into separate assertions. So here I just created a method for assert element, and here I have categories inside it, displayed, enabled, and selected. So this I will get it from my template wherein I have a separate parameter for assertion type. So here I'll mention the assertion type. So when my assertion type is displayed, I will call this particular case function. If it is enabled, I'll call this. If it is selected, I'll call this. So I'll add my assert statements here. Assert dot assert equals true, and here I will verify whether my element is displayed. So just driver dot find element. So I will give it like this. So the assertion type, I'm going to get it from the user. So I will pass it as a parameter. Similarly, the object that I'm going to recognize, I will be recognizing it using the object name and the locator type as we saw in the keywords example. So again, I will include that main method over here, the get object method. So I will create a method called get object, and then I'll frame my by expression. Okay, so instead of having it like this, using this method, I'll just make it to a generalized form. So I'll just say give a call to that method and verify whether it is getting displayed. Okay, similarly, I will add assertions for these categories also, enabled, selected. So here my function will just change, verify whether is enabled, and here it will be is selected. Okay, so now my assertion method is complete. I have created an assert keyword, assert element, which has categories like displayed, enabled, and selected. So now let me add all the keywords and assertion in my Excel sheet. So now I filled in all the keywords here from my library file, similarly the assertions. So if I'm having categories inside my assertion, I've also mentioned the assertion types. So user will have an understanding of whatever you have in your framework by just having a look at this sheet. So now let's have a look at the test cases and start filling our test case template. So let's start the second test case. It says enter URL and then enter valid username, enter password, click on login button. Okay, so first thing, enter URL. So for this, I will go back to the keywords list. So I will go back to the keywords list. I will find my corresponding keyword. So this is the keyword for entering the URL, and I will fill in my test step like this. So I will say enter URL, and the URL that I'm entering, I'll pass it in the test data. Okay, the object name and locator type is empty because I'm not interacting with any element in this test step. So that is left empty. So the next test step is enter valid username. So for entering or typing in something, you have a keyword called type. So I will just make a call to that keyword type. So I will just say type and then locate the username, object name, tell its locator type, and also pass the test data for that username. So this object name, I refer it from my object repository. So this is my object repository, and I got the object name from here, and I recognize this value as XPath. So I said this is the XPath locator type. Similarly, I will fill it for password and login steps also. So next step is my entering the password and then clicking on the login button. So let me fill it for that also. Okay, so again I recognize these elements from my object repository. This is my object repository, and this is the object name, which in turn is the name that I gave here. Similarly for login, I have login object name, and these are XPath, so I gave my locator type as XPath. So next comes the verification part. So here it says verify whether a particular div is getting displayed. Verify welcome div after successful login. So my assertion will go and look for the keywords in the list. So to assert for an element, this is the keyword that I have, assert element. So I will make a call to this assert element, and my type will be displayed. I need to assert whether the element is getting displayed. So I will fill my test step like this. I will say assert element is my keyword, and I'm performing this assertion on a web element whose object name is welcome, and the assertion type is displayed. So again I get this object name from my object repository. I have my object name as welcome, so that is what I have passed it in here. So this is how you fill in the test steps in your test case template. So when you design your framework, you will have your library files scripted. You will have your assertions and your keywords in a library file, and in the main driver script you will have the logic to read whatever you have specified in your template, so that we will see later. So and then you give the object repository to the user, you give this keywords list to the user, so user will have only these two, and using these two data and the test case sheet, they will come to an idea of how to design these test cases. So they will fill in the data accordingly for each of the test steps, and then the test case is created in the template. Okay, so in the next session we will see how to create your main driver script in order to read this particular template. So for now, have an understanding of the framework with the library file, the template, and the object repository. Thank you.